The bells tolled that morning, their iron voices rolling across the town like the echo of thunder. They should have been joyful, announcing a union meant to bind two souls, but in the dry, restless air of the frontier, the sound carried something heavier. Folks gathered on the dusty street paused in their work, turning toward the little white church perched on the hill, its steeple like a finger pointed to heaven. The year was 1873, and in a land of dust, blood, and gold, weddings were rare. They were fragile promises, whispered against a world that too often swallowed hope whole. Inside, the church smelled of beeswax and pine, the pews scrubbed raw for the occasion. Candles flickered despite the morning light, shadows dancing against walls that had witnessed both funerals and Sunday sermons delivered with fire. Every seat was filled, men and women whispering, fanning themselves against the heat. Outside, the wind carried the scent of horses, gun oil, and the faint sweetness of lilac broadened by wagons for miles away. At the heart of it all stood her, the bride, Clara May Whitlock, 22 years old. Her beauty was undeniable, though it was not the kind carved in portraits or told in ballads. Hers was a fierce, living beauty, eyes like storm clouds, hair bound in a dark braid hidden beneath a veil of white lace. The dress, stitched with care by her own hands, flowed with simple grace, not the extravagant finery of Eastern brides, but something born of work and love. Her lips curved in a smile for the gathered crowd, but it was a smile stretched thin, as if it might tear with the weight of her thoughts. Beside her at the altar stood Jonathan Hale, the groom, a man 10 years her elder. Tall, broad-shouldered, his suit hung on him like it had been bought with coin and power, not earned with sweat. His hair, slicked back, gleamed dark as coal. His eyes were sharp and restless, the eyes of a man who measured the worth of everything he saw. To the townsfolk, he was successful, a rancher whose herds stretched across valleys, whose men carried rifles in his name. To Clara, he had been a promise of security, whispered after her father's death, left her family sinking under debt. But there was another truth behind those smiles. For when Jonathan looked at Clara, there was something cold in the corners of his gaze, a hardness hidden beneath the practiced charm of his lips. She had seen it in quiet moments when his hand lingered too tight on her wrist, or when his voice carried the tone of command rather than affection. And though she never spoke of it, the fear lodged deep in her chest that morning, as solid as the corset pressing against her ribs. The guests fidgeted, watching the pair. Some whispered with envy, others with suspicion. On the bride's side sat her mother, Mrs. Whitlock, pale and weary, her hands clutching a worn Bible as if it might keep her daughter safe. Her brother, Samuel, sat stiff and grim, a revolver hidden under his coat. His jaw clenched each time Jonathan's men shifted in the pews, their boots heavy, their eyes scanning the room with the cool indifference of hired guns. The preacher cleared his throat, his words trembling as he began the ceremony. He was an old man, his voice deep, but quivering, as though even he felt the air charged with something unsaid. "Dearly beloved," he began, but his voice faltered beneath the weight of silence that pressed closer with each word. Clara's heart pounded in her ears. Her gaze wandered over the faces in the room, faces she had known all her life, neighbors, merchants, friends from a trading post. Yet behind their polite smiles, she saw doubt, curiosity, fear. Everyone seemed to sense it, though no one dared speak. This union was not born of love, but of necessity. And then, just as the preacher prepared to bind their vows, the church doors groaned open. The sound echoed sharp, dragging every head toward the back. A figure stood framed in the doorway, tall against the sunlight pouring in. Dust clung to his boots, his hat shadowed his face, but the lines of his body were familiar to Clara in a way that struck her breathless. Her pulse stuttered. She knew that walk, that tilt of the shoulders. She had known it since childhood. It was Elias Turner, once a boy who had ridden with her father across open ranges, once a friend whose laughter had carried across wheat fields, once more than a friend when twilight dared to soften their gazes. He had vanished 2 years ago after rumors of a shooting gone wrong, leaving Clara with nothing but silence where his letters used to be. Now here he was, alive, returned, his presence cutting through the room like a knife through silk. The congregation gasped, voices rising in startled murmurs. Jonathan's jaw tightened, his hand twitching toward the revolver holstered at his side before he caught himself. His men shifted uneasily. Elias took a step forward, the floorboards creaking beneath his boots. His eyes dark and steady, fixed on Clara with a weight that stripped her bare. He tipped his hat back, revealing a face worn by dust and distance, but unmistakably him. His voice, when it came, was low and raw, every syllable cracking like distant thunder. "I can't let this happen." The room froze. The preacher faltered, his Bible trembling in his grip. Guests shifted, some leaning forward with hungry eyes, others shrinking as if danger itself had entered with him. Clara's hands trembled, her bouquet of wildflowers quivering as petals dropped to the floor. Jonathan stepped forward, his voice like iron. "You got no right here, Turner. This ain't your place." But Elias didn't move his gaze from Clara. "You know it's wrong," he said, softer now, though every word carried. "You know it in your heart." Her chest tightened, the weight of years pressing down upon her. Memories flashed, Elias laughing beneath the summer sun, Elias promising her a future by the riverside, Elias disappearing without a word. And then Jonathan's eyes upon her, promises of wealth and land, yet always laced with control. The silence grew unbearable, stretching thin as glass about to shatter. Outside, thunder rumbled on the horizon, though no storm had been forecast. Clara swallowed, her lips parting as though to speak. The crowd leaned forward. Jonathan's face flushed red, rage simmering beneath the surface. Elias stood, unyielding, his boots planted, his voice steady as he whispered again, "Don't do this." And in that instant, the church no longer felt like a place of union, but a battlefield. The silence that followed Elias's words weighed heavier than iron chains. It was as if every soul inside the church held its breath, waiting for the first crack of thunder that would decide whether this gathering would end in union or in blood. Jonathan's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenching tight enough to crack teeth. His hand hovered over the polished grip of his revolver, itching for the insult to justify the draw. Clara felt the room tilt, her body swaying under the strain of two men staring at her as though her choice would carve the fate of them all. She could feel her mother's eyes boring into her from the front pew, trembling lips moving in silent prayer. Samuel shifted, one hand slipping toward the revolver beneath his coat, his posture taut as a drawn bowstring. He knew Jonathan's men wouldn't hesitate if steel was bared. Elias took another step forward, his boots striking the floor with slow, steady rhythm. His voice was louder now, though not a shout, more like the sound of judgment itself. "You bind her to you, hail but not with love. You bind her with fear, and I'll not stand by while she's chained." The church erupted in whispers, half the room stirred to outrage, the other half wide-eyed with anticipation. Clara's pulse hammered. She wanted to speak, to tell Elias to stop before it was too late, yet her throat closed, her tongue heavy as stone. The words refused to come, trapped by years of silence and sacrifice. Jonathan laughed then, a low, bitter sound that chilled the air. "You vanish like a coward, Turner, for 2 long years, and now you come crawling back in rags, wagging your tongue about chains? You're nothing. You've always been nothing." A ranch hand who thought a girl above his station would waste her life waiting. He spread his arms as though to show the church his wealth, his power. "Look around. The Whitlocks needed saving, and I was the man who stepped in when their so-called protector disappeared." The words cut, deep, each one a blade, but Elias did not flinch. His gaze burned steady on Clara. "I left because I was hunted, not because I abandoned her. And I came back because every road, every mile carried me here, to keep her from a life that'll bleed her dry." Jonathan's face twisted, the mask of charm stripped away to reveal the cruelty beneath. His hand finally dropped his gun. Gasps tore through the congregation. Samuel rose to his feet, revolver drawn, and the pews scraped back as Jonathan's men stood, steel flashing in the candlelight. Chaos trembled on the edge of eruption. "Stop!" Clara's voice cracked through the air, sharp enough to freeze the room. Her bouquet slipped from her trembling hands, flowers scattering across the altar steps. For the first time, she felt the weight of both men's stares not as a burden, but as a force demanding choice. She drew a breath that tasted of smoke and fear. This isn't what a wedding should be." Her words broke the spell. Murmurs rose, questions whispered between neighbors. The preacher, pale and sweating, closed his Bible with shaking hands. He dared not move, dare not speak. Jonathan turned to her, his fury cloaked in a brittle smile. "Sweetheart, don't let this fool turn your head with lies. You know what's at stake. Your family, your land. I've given you a future no man else could offer." But Clara shook her head, her voice steadier now though tears blurred her sight. "A future isn't worth chains, Jonathan. Not when every promise feels like a prison." The air cracked. Jonathan's smile vanished, his mask shattered. His gun came free, the barrel glinting. "Then you'll have no choice at all," he snarled. The moment snapped like lightning. Samuel fired first, the shot exploding against the rafters, with splintering. Screams erupted as women ducked, men threw themselves behind pews. Jonathan's men drew, and chaos thundered through the church. Gunfire cracked, smoke filled the room, and the air turned thick with terror. Clara stumbled backward, her hands covering her ears as shots rang out around her. She saw Samuel grappling with two of Hale's men, his revolver knocked from his hand, fists flying. The preacher crawled beneath the pulpit, whispering prayers lost beneath the roar. Glass shattered as a bullet struck the stained window, shards raining down like colored rain. Elias moved through it like a storm, pushing past pews, knocking men aside, his only focus on Clara. He reached her, his hands gripping her shoulders. "Come with me," he shouted over the din. She stared at him, torn between the man who had once been her dream and the man who had promised her survival. Behind them, Jonathan's voice rose above the chaos, snarling with rage. "She's mine, Turner. You won't take what belongs to me." The word belongs struck Clara harder than any bullet. In that instant, the truth she had tried to bury clawed its way free. She was not a possession, not a bargain between men, not a prize. Elias pulled her toward the door, but her feet felt heavy, every step a war within her soul. She glanced back once, seeing Jonathan's face twisted with hate, Samuel struggling against three men, her mother weeping with hands clasped tight. Guilt tore through her, but instinct screamed louder. If she stayed, she would be broken. The church doors slammed open as Elias dragged her into the storm outside. The sky had darkened, the wind whipping dust and rain across the hill. The bells still tolled above them, relentless, each clang sounding more like a funeral than a wedding. Behind them, the gunfire raged on, echoing across the town. Shouts rose, boots thundered against the floor. Jonathan's voice bellowed her name like a curse, but it was swallowed by the storm. Clara stumbled across the mud, the rain soaking her gown, lace clinging to her legs like shackles. Where do we go?" she cried, her voice breaking. "Anywhere but here," Elias said, his hand firm on hers. "You're free now, Clara. Free." But even as he spoke, she knew freedom was not yet won. Not while Jonathan still lived, not while her family remained trapped inside that church, not while her heart trembled between love and betrayal. She stopped, yanking her hand from Elias's grip, her chest heaving as lightning split the sky. "I can't just run," she said, her voice low, trembling but firm. "If I leave without facing him, without facing myself, he'll follow me forever." Elias stared at her, rain streaming down his face. For a moment, pain flickered in his eyes, but then he nodded, as though he had always known she carried more strength than she realized. A figure emerged from the shadows, near the church, moving fast through the storm. Clara turned, her breath catching in her throat, expecting Jonathan. But it was not him. The figure stopped just beyond the glow of the doorway, rain dripping from the brim of a wide hat. His coat was long, dark, his stance deliberate, his face hidden in the storm. The shape of him was unfamiliar, Yet his presence radiated danger. He had come not as guest nor as friend, but as something else entirely. Clara's heart pounded as Elias stepped in front of her, hand drifting to the worn handle of his revolver. The storm howled, the bells groaned, and the stranger's voice cut through the rain like steel. "You've chosen the wrong day to run, Miss Whitlock." The stranger's voice hung in the storm like the crack of a whip, sharp enough to steal Clara's breath. Elias stiffened beside her, his hand tight on the revolver at his side, though he had not yet drawn. The rain sheeted down, soaking them through, washing blood and smoke from the air behind them. Clara felt her heart hammer against her ribs, every beat louder than the thunder. She had thought the worst was behind her, but fate had not yet finished its work. The man stepped forward, his boots sinking into the mud with heavy, deliberate steps. Lightning flashed, revealing a face weathered by years on the trail, scarred across one cheek, eyes dark as the night itself. His voice came again, low and steady. "Jonathan Hale sent for me, said there might be trouble. Looks like he was right." Clara's stomach twisted. Jonathan's reach spread further than she'd ever feared, a network of guns and men bought with coin and cruelty. Even here, outside the church, beyond the vows she had fled, his shadow loomed. She felt the weight of chains she had not yet broken, and the fear that, even in running, she was still caught. Elias stepped forward, planting himself between Clara and the stranger. His voice was harsh, yet controlled. "This ain't your fight. Turn around. Let the storm wash you back the way you came." The man laughed, a sound colder than the rain. "My fight's wherever the money points me. And Hale's money's good." His hand drifted toward the pistol at his hip, slow as a snake coiling before the strike. Clara felt her throat tighten. The church doors still banged behind them with the chaos of battle, shouts, and gunfire echoing. Samuel was in there, her mother too. And here outside, another fight was brewing, another test of her courage. For a moment she wanted to sink to her knees, to close her eyes and let it all vanish. But then she saw Elias, battered, unshaken, standing firm even when the odds bent against him. And something inside her rose, fragile but unbreakable. She stepped forward, brushing past Elias before he could stop her. Her voice, though trembling, cut through the storm. "You think Jonathan Hale owns me? That I'll crawl back because you draw a gun in his name? He can pay every man west of the Mississippi, and it won't change one truth. I am not his." The stranger tilted his head, the faintest trace of surprise flickering in his dark eyes. Elias's breath caught behind her, but he held his tongue. The air between them tightened, waiting for the break. Then, with the speed of a rattler, the man's pistol flashed free. But Elias was faster. Steel sang as both men fired almost in the same breath. The roar cracked the sky, smoke billowing in the rain. Clara gasped, stumbling back as the stranger staggered, clutching aside. His pistol fell into the mud, sinking with the weight of finality. Elias lowered his weapon, his chest heaving. The man groaned once, then toppled, his body swallowed by the storm. The sound of him hitting the ground was drowned by the bells, still tolling overhead, relentless as judgment. Clara's legs trembled, but she did not fall. Her eyes locked on Elias, who turned to her, rain streaking down his face, his jaw clenched with the grim knowledge that killing had become survival once more. His voice was quiet, strained. "We don't have long. Hale won't stop. He'll come for you himself." Her heart twisted at the truth of it. She looked back toward the church. The gunfire had slowed, shouts breaking into echoes of retreat and pain. Smoke drifted from the shattered windows. The people inside, her people, were trapped between Hale's wrath and their own fear. She cannot leave them. "We have to go back," she said, her voice firm though fear clawed at her throat. "My family's in there. Samuel, my mother, they won't make it out unless someone stands with them." Elias hesitated, then nodded. He had always been a man who chose danger over dishonor. Together they turned, boots splashing through mud, back toward the firelit doorway. Inside, the scene was chaos. Pews overturned, bodies slumped where bullets had struck, smoke and blood staining the holy place. Jonathan Hale stood at the altar, pistol still smoking, his suit spattered. His eyes found Clara the moment she crossed the threshold, and a smile spread across his face, twisted and cruel. "You came back," he said, voice thick with triumph. "I knew you would. You can't run from me, Clara. You never could." Her chest tightened, but she did not shrink beneath his gaze. She stepped forward, her voice carrying to every corner of the ruined church. "I didn't come back for you. I came back to end this." Gasps rippled through the remaining guests, those two paralyzed with fear to flee. Samuel, bruised and bloodied, lifted his head from where he knelt between two of Hale's men, hope sparking in his eyes. Jonathan laughed, but it was hollow now, strained at the edges. He raised his gun. "And this? You're a fool. You belong to me, and I'll prove it to every soul here." Before Elias could move, before Samuel could rise, Clara stepped forward, her hand closing around the revolver of a fallen man at her feet. The weight was unfamiliar, heavy, but it steadied in her grip as though destiny itself had placed it there. She leveled it at Jonathan, her arm trembling, yet her gaze unwavering. "You'll never own me," she said. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Jonathan's smile faltered, his mask cracking, revealing fear beneath his fury. He opened his mouth to speak, but the storm outside roared louder, the bells above clanged as though heaven itself bore witness. Clara's finger tightened, her choice sealed in the fire of her spirit. The shot split the air. Jonathan staggered, eyes wide, the revolver slipping from his hand. He stumbled back against the altar, his knees buckling as his voice rasped one last curse. Then he crumpled, his body falling among the shattered flowers and broken vows. The church was silent save for the rain dripping through shattered glass, the bells tolling slower now, their echo fading. Jonathan Hale, the man who had bound her with fear, was gone. Clara lowered the gun, her breath ragged, her body trembling. She felt Elias's hand on her shoulder, steadying, but she did not collapse. She stood tall, her gaze sweeping the room, meeting the eyes of her mother, her brother, the neighbors who had watched in silence for too long. "It's over," she said, her voice soft but unshakable. "He cannot hurt us anymore." No one spoke, but the truth of her words rippled through them. Some wept, some bowed their heads, some whispered prayers. Clara felt the tears burning her eyes, but they were not of weakness. They were of release, of strength forged through fire. Elias stepped beside her, his voice low, so only she could hear. "You saved them. You saved yourself." She turned to him, meeting his gaze, the weight of their years apart falling away. "No," she whispered. "We saved each other." Outside, the storm began to break. The bells gave one final toll before falling silent. The clouds parted, letting pale light spill over the church, over the graves of the fallen, over the woman who had walked through fire and emerged unbroken. And though the wedding had ended in blood, in sorrow, and in tears, it had also birthed something truer than vows spoken beneath a preacher's tongue. It had birthed freedom. So, what does a tale like this leave behind? Perhaps only this: that love cannot be bought, nor can freedom be bound. And sometimes the tears shed in sorrow are the very ones that water the roots of strength. If this story has found you, don't let it pass like dust on the wind. Share it. Carry it. Let it remind you that even in the harshest places, the human spirit can rise,